Okay, so picture this. A super simple Game Boy game. The kind of thing one person could code in their basement ends up kicking off a global industrial revolution. Sounds like science fiction, right? Well, today we're going to walk through a wild hypothetical roadmap that does exactly that. A plan to change the world, not with software, but with the very stuff it's made from.
So that's the big question, isn't it? How could a game possibly rebuild society? The trick isn't selling millions of copies. No. It's about using the game's intellectual property, its characters, its world, as a lever to completely change our physical world. It's a pretty crazy thought experiment in societal engineering.
And this is the core idea. They call it the substrate strategy. You don't hoard your digital characters and stories behind copyrights. You do the opposite. You give it all away for free with one single world-changing string attached. So let's rewind to the very beginning. The first 4 years, you gotta understand, this wasn't about building some grand empire. It was about survival. It was one huge gamble, and a really slow, kind of messy start to an idea that, let's be honest, almost everyone thought was completely insane. What's so wild about this timeline is how fast everything moves. Even though it seems chaotic, it all starts with this little niche game on itch.io. Then the creator just open sources everything, the art, the music, the whole story, puts it in something called an asset vault. The first real test, an action figure made of hemp bioplastic. It sells out instantly. And then comes the tech, a blockchain, not for crypto speculation, but as a totally transparent ledger to track the entire supply chain. And right here, this is the catch. This was the one rule, the material license. It basically said, hey, anybody can make a movie, a toy, whatever you want with our characters. You don't have to pay us a dime in royalties. But your final physical product has to be made of at least 90% industrial hemp. It was like a golden handcuff.
So, how was this whole thing funded in those early days? Not by some big venture capital firm. Nope. It was built by the community. The entire initial war chest came from tiny microtransactions, like $3 at a time, from fans who just believed in the vision. It just goes to show, you really can build a movement from the ground up.
All right, let's jump into the next era, because this is where the project goes from being a single game to a massive, interconnected ecosystem. This is where it really starts to scale by bringing other creators into the fold, and unbelievably, plugging directly into the education system. So to get bigger, the founders started recruiting other indie creators, people who were also struggling. They pooled all their different IPs into this giant global asset catalog. A smart contract on the blockchain automatically enforced that hemp-only rule, no lawyers needed. And this is the brilliant part. Royalties were paid out to creators instantly, and huge agricultural deals in South America were funded by a completely transparent, decentralized treasury. Now this is where it gets absolutely revolutionary. A totally open-source school curriculum was released. Schools started adopting it because, well, it was free and it was actually engaging. Kids were literally learning how to grow and process hemp in the classroom, earning skill tokens, basically NFTs, on the blockchain to prove their competence. And then they used that very same material to 3D print their own desks and their own learning tools. Insane. Okay, so now we're at the tipping point. The project has the IP, it's got the supply chain locked down, so in years 10 to 15, it moves way beyond just t-shirts and toys. This is where it starts to fundamentally rebuild the infrastructure of our daily lives. And the whole way it made money completely flipped. It wasn't about direct sales anymore. Instead, this massive decentralized treasury, a DAO, started growing from tiny little transaction fees on the global trade of all these hemp-based goods. The system was now funding itself. With literally billions of dollars in this treasury, the DAO started funding the construction of these enormous hemp gigafactories. They began pumping out everyday items, toothbrushes, car parts, the stuff you'd find at any big box store, but it was all cheaper and more durable than plastic. The hemp standard wasn't just some niche eco idea anymore. It was now the economic default. And you can see here how that treasury was automatically being put to work. It wasn't being hoarded by a CEO in a bank account. The code itself was reinvesting the money into building more factories, funding crazy R&D for things like superconductors, and building local community hubs. So once that physical infrastructure is in place, something else starts to happen. Society itself begins to change. This era isn't really about production anymore. It's about collaboration, and it's about a completely new definition of what people actually value. This slide really shows the fundamental shift. The motivation to just hoard billions of dollars for yourself, it kind of just evaporated. And why? Because the public infrastructure, the community centers, the tools, the entertainment, it was all just better than anything your private money could buy. Status now came from what you actually contributed to the network for everyone else. And the engine driving this entire society was the DAO. Just think of it like a global company with no CEO. All the big decisions, like where to build a new factory or how to fund a disaster relief, were made by the community. And votes were weighted by your contribution, not by how much money you had. It's a system run by transparent, incorruptible code. And this is what that world looked like. That R&D led to actual hemp-based superconductors, changing electronics forever. The cost of living just plummeted because communities could produce most of their own goods, and culture just flourished. A hit song wasn't owned by one artist. It was remixed and reinterpreted by every region in its own unique style. Your value to society was written right there on a public ledger, not hidden away in a bank. All right, let's talk about the final phase, the endgame. This is the point where the founder's role just becomes totally obsolete and the system they built achieves complete self-sustaining autonomy. This table shows that self-sustaining loop perfectly. The system just runs itself. Revenue comes in from global trade, smart contracts automatically reinvest it, someone uploads a new blueprint for an invention, it's instantly shared with the whole network. A natural disaster hits, relief funds are triggered automatically. It's like a self-repairing global community that's governed entirely by logic. And this right here is the ultimate legacy. The founder eventually passes away, but there's no power vacuum, no chaos. Why? Because they never actually owned the empire in the first place. Their greatest achievement was building a system so robust, so fair, and so autonomous that it didn't need them anymore. Which leaves us with one last, pretty provocative question. Is a world built on a single material standard and governed by unchangeable code a blueprint for a true collaborative utopia? Or is it just the most elegant and maybe the most inescapable monopoly the world has ever seen? Definitely something to think about.